When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Ali Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Season 7 of Insatiable. This season, our theme is hunger and taking a fresh look at different approaches to satisfying our hunger. To be physically and emotionally hungry is to be vulnerable. As Dr. Brené Brown says, vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. To have physical hunger or to acknowledge our emotional and soul hungers is to choose to be open to the daring risk of being fully satisfied. We will be exploring various diets and approaches to satisfying our holistic hungers. Before we get to our episode today, the pros and cons of functional medicine, during our transition episodes to Season 7, I had hinted at something about if you love the conversations we have here and are all about exploring and experimenting to find the radical truth for every body you have, your physical, emotional, and soul, I had something exciting to share with you. Drum roll. Introducing the Insatiable membership community. This community is designed to help you take action around the topics we discuss here and support you to find your radical truth. I rolled the community out privately last year to clients new and old, and the results have shown me there is a real need for a community where we can trust ourselves, learn from each other, and as we get healthier, want to take more daring risks to make our life choices potent healing medicine. I'm now opening it up to Insatiable listeners. In a nutshell, it's a community where there are no gurus and we learn from each other. Once a month, we have a mastermind topic that helps you gain clarity and have a group to support and learn from wherever you are on your path. And once a month, there's also a Q&A call with me where I coach attendees to get inspired, unstuck, and clear on your next step. We start a fresh new season of topics in the community in March, which we will be focused on a fresh, renewed look at our hunger. You can find more details at alishapiro.com/IC2019. So on to today's episode, which is a solo one with me, your host, Ali. And I'm going to share the pros and cons of functional medicine through my own journey with it, plus what I've seen with clients who often come to me after trying to implement functional medicine protocols, either through books they've read or working directly with a functional medicine doctor or practitioner. Now, when we look to functional medicine, I really think we have a hunger for root cause resolution. We've got this soul craving for depth, right? That's what root cause resolution is. We don't want to just band-aid our symptoms anymore, which I think is also a hunger for common sense, right? And I also think there's an emotional hunger when we're interested in functional medicine to understand our bodies and also be understood by our doctors, right? Which is a really healthy hunger, right? To want to be witnessed and seen and acknowledged. And because our body houses our soul, I believe when we want to get to the root of any issue, it's also our soul finally getting our attention, saying it's time to wake up a little bit more and to go a little bit deeper. So I first found functional medicine way back in 2006 when I was at Holistic Nutrition School at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. And at the time when I was going to that school, I know the curriculum has evolved a lot, but it was the live version. And we learned all these different dietary theories from Ayurveda to traditional Chinese medicine. I mean, very high level understanding of them. And we learned about functional medicine from Dr. Mark Hyman, who, if you're familiar with functional medicine, him and Dr. Jeffrey Bland tend to be the face of it. And the Westerner in me, right? I talk a lot about our culture myths, but I'm very much a Western person. My thinking has definitely become more integrated over time, but at the time, the Westerner in me loved the biology and the systems focus of our biology. So basically, functional medicine came along and said, we need to look at our whole body with symptoms, right? And this felt like common sense to me and yet so wildly radical. And so as I started to study, that was really the dietary theory that I was fascinated by, which is basically looking at food through a medical lens rather than fat and calories, which felt really radical to me because I had only looked at things really through fat and calories. And functional medicine helped me connect the dots of my seemingly disconnected symptoms of acne, allergies, irritable bowel syndrome, and depression. And discovering that depression was a symptom and not a diagnosis changed everything. And you need to understand, like, I had struggled with depression basically since going through cancer at 13. I didn't know that I was struggling with PTSD, which led to my depression. I had just tried a bunch of different antidepressants, was on Wellbutrin at the time. And on my mom's side of the family, there's a lot of mental illness. People being committed, to mental hospitals, a lot of people in my family on antidepressants. And so I had tried natural things like kava kava or St. John's wort and tried getting light, and none of that. And I had tried therapy and nothing really worked. So I had kind of thought like, hey, this is a diagnosis I had. And so by learning this stuff, I started to cook real food and I got off gluten and I learned how to balance my blood sugar. And I was eventually able to taper off my Wellbutrin, which was probably the first time I wasn't on antidepressants in about 10 years. And what really moved the needle for me was cutting out gluten and getting off processed foods. And this was new information back then, and having scientific research that showed evidence that this worked was part of what helped me, as I'm very much a theoretical learner. I do need to understand the theory and the science. However, it was the lived experience of relief that got me to start cooking more. Now, I worked with a functional medicine practitioner named Jackie Doyle, who's an acupuncturist and also one of the brightest minds in functional medicine. My office was in hers and she mentored me for 4 years. But I also worked with her and she helped me match what enzymes and this GI powder I needed to help me rebuild my GI system. Because I realized one of the main triggers of my depression was the chemotherapy. I was on really toxic drugs. I mean, the mop in my chemotherapy was what they used in the atomic bomb. And I was on a ton of steroids, prednisone for months, right? So I had to rebuild my gut. And so the main functional medicine tools I used were enzymes in this GI powder, but they only worked because of the bigger changes to how I was eating. And again, at the time, I thought I was eating healthy, but most of my food was packaged. And so for me to start cooking at home was radical for me because I still don't love to cook. I was single at the time. I don't know if those of you who live alone, sometimes I would come home and just eat cereal, then I would often binge at night, but I just wasn't really into cooking. But as I started to get onto real whole foods and gradually cut out gluten and introduce these enzymes to kind of get my stomach acid back working, part of my IBS is I had really bad reflux. And so the enzymes helped reignite the digestive juices and stomach acid I needed. And the GI powder helped turn over my cell lining, my GI cell lining, much quicker so that it didn't take, forever to heal. And so my immediate IBS symptoms got better. And over probably a year, my depression had gotten better. And I really started to shift my relationship to food. I still really wanted to lose weight at this time, but I started eating well because it truly made me feel better in a way that dieting never had or anything else. It made me realize that when I was dieting and felt so good, it was because I thought I was being good, not necessarily that I felt good. I often had cravings, was hungry, and I was still depressed when I was dieting, but I had normalized that. And so a depressive fog that I had normalized began to lift. And, Carlos and I saw Hamilton, the play, a few weeks back. And the Schuyler Sisters song in Hamilton is this earworm that this rebel soul can't stop. And they start singing and they say, look around, look around. The revolution is happening. I'm not going to sing it because I know my limits. I do not have a good singing voice. Even in 8th grade chorus, they asked me to lip sync. So But basically, the Shiloh Sister song says, look around, the revolution is happening. New ideas in the air. Look around. We are lucky to be alive right now. And this is how I felt about functional medicine when I discovered it 15 years ago. This was radical to me, revolutionary, to look at nutrition through a caloric lens. It really put the power of health back in my hands, and I was getting results that I was never able to get from my doctors. And what I now know about adult development and becoming more the author of our lives, with our health included, this set me up to question a lot more in how I had been socialized to believe doctors know best, to trust the medical system fully, and our general society. I assumed our general society was on the right track with how to be happy and fulfilled. And I think the symptom of that is I was still reading like People magazine and Women's Health and all these conventional magazines that I still contribute to today from an expert position, but I really thought that they had the answers. So one of the pros that I love about functional medicine is in the Institute for Functional Medicine, which is where practitioners go to study, is that it has so much rigor and it's pursuing evidence-based, which means there's evidence of outcomes, right? I always say Truce with Food is research-based because the model that I created is based on researched theories, but I can't say it's evidence-based because I don't have the resources to enroll people in studies or the woman power, right? So evidence-based is a super high standard in the medical community to be able to prove that thousands of people have gone through this process and we can say this is evidence-based. And so functional medicine, this group is really setting out to do this kind of evidence-based medicine so that you can know, for example, my depression lifted because I was really inflamed and I had, gut issues. Some people have essential fatty acid deficiencies, right? So it's really targeted healing for our biology. And, this is what functional medicine says on its website of this research, of this evidence-based process is the result is an ever-evolving, cutting-edge systems biology approach to health that treats each patient as a whole person. No longer is the patient seen purely through the lens of a dysfunctional organ system, a disease, or a syndrome, but instead of a person who can be helped on the path to optimal wellness. By evaluating a matrix of fundamental causes in the diagnostic and therapeutic process, we can more accurately understand the roots of pathophysiology, leading to earlier and more effective interventions that not only extend lives, but also give patients years back of good living. And this is pretty ambitious because the medical system is set to reimburse for treatments. It's not oriented towards wellness outcomes. And so there's a real lack of data, and the Institute for Functional Medicine is trying to fill that gap. So if you think about this, how revolutionary this is, when you go to get a blood test or an MRI or something, they're only evaluating, did you get that test? They're not saying, wait, does this actually improve any outcomes? And I think a really tangible example that I'm very familiar with is, in the UK and Sweden, for example, they don't test for cholesterol because they know that heart attacks and heart disease actually, in most people, changing cholesterol does not improve the outcomes. So they don't waste resources on that. Now in the US, because our system is profit driven, the pharmaceutical industries have really targeted cholesterol to say, hey, you need statins for this. And so you get reimbursed as a provider if you prescribe statins rather than saying, wait a second, if we actually look at outcomes, I think it's like 2% of people benefit from statins. So this is a complete paradigm shift to start to measure based on outcome rather than checking off the boxes of tests that we gave you. Right. So this is an emerging field, and they're still using a foundation of biological system science that is helpful to know. And we're on a gigantic learning curve, right? We have to be able to hold both. We know so much and we know so little. So it's a really ambitious way of measuring outcomes because health is so multifactorial. I've had this conversation with some of my clients who are physicians, and they are talking about with the Affordable Care Act, they were really incentivized. The Affordable Care Act started to give reimbursement based on outcomes, but it's really hard. I remember one client was telling me she was a rehabilitation doctor, and she was saying, it's hard because we could get someone well, but then what if they end up in the ER 3 weeks later, but it's for a different reason, right? And so how do you measure that? It's not as easy as it sounds, right? And I'm just bringing up the nuance here because I really admire what Institute for Functional Medicine is attempting to do. And so this is what revolution feels like, right? We're leaving the old behind, but building that bridge to the new is messy as hell. And for my clients who have worked with me privately or gone through Truce with Food, this is like the muddle of the process, right? Our old identity is dissolving, a new one is still forming. And healthcare is having its own identity crisis, right? Our institutions have identities too. And our healthcare system, what IFM has basically said on their website is we are no longer seeing the body as broken. We are no longer participating in this war metaphor that every symptom needs to be squashed. We are saying the body is brilliant and resilient, and these are symptoms that we should be paying attention to. And I think this is the equivalent of what positive psychology is trying to do with coaching. Right? An old model of therapy was the client is broken and we can maybe get them to zero. And Carl Rogers in the 50s, who was kind of considered the father of humanistic psychology. I mean, I could go off on a tangent here, but he started to say, no, the client is brilliant. We just need to ask the right questions. And positive psychology is trying to build upon that, right? That's kind of the revolution that they're trying to embark on. And so it's a completely different mindset, right? You come from different perspectives. And so another pro that I love about this is that the healthcare providers who tend to be in functional medicine are insatiably curious. They're willing to learn how to learn. I don't care really anymore if someone is book smart and graduated from a top school when it comes to my wellness, right? Maybe for surgery, or at least if they've trained a lot. But when it comes to any emerging disruptive field, I want people who are willing to learn how to learn, right? These are creative thinkers. They're willing to look at their blind spots. They're willing to say, whoa, let me explore this. And so when I first started out, functional medicine people were far and few between. Like you couldn't find any functional medicine doctors. It was really people like Jackie, like myself, who were early adopters. We were enthusiasts, right? We did it for the love of this learning and curiosity, and we were doing it for the love and exploration of it. And I still think those are the people that are in functional medicine. And that's what I've experienced with people who are choosing this path. It's not an easy path. You have to, especially for physicians, you have to basically say much of what I learned in medical school that I've spent 10 years of my life learning, hundreds of thousands of dollars I may still have debt from. Maybe it wasn't everything that I thought it was, right? It's still grateful to obviously have a strong basis of medicine, but it's a different lens of things. But these are people who really, for the love of learning and love of medicine, they are frustrated with enough of the lack of results for their patients, and they see the insanity of only putting a bandage on a chronic issue and are willing to learn new things. One of the top OB doctors in Philly, she was a functional medicine doctor, and I asked her, how did you come around to this? And she told me she had to be willing to unlearn much of what she learned in medical school. And so again, it's a huge philosophical difference. And so I just really want to honor that. I think it's a huge pro to have people who are willing to learn how to learn when you get new medicine, new information. And another pro that I want to add that I couldn't articulate at the time, but I can now that I've had my master's degree in the change process and adult development, part of that is that the adult development awakening it can provide in us. They used to think that adults' brains and our development stopped, right? We always knew babies and children develop, but we used to think, adults are who they are once they hit about 20 in their 20s. Now we know that's not true. We can continue to develop and learn more with more complexity and become more self-authoring, which is a lot of what Truce with Food does for people, is become more creators of our lives rather than feeling like things just are the way they are. And on an everyday level, this feels like going from knowing what to do to doing it more often because we get it. You know those things you've heard before, but then it takes a while to sink in. And for me, if you're stubborn, it takes a long time to sink in. Well, that's the adult development, when we actually implement the things because we understand how it benefits us. We really start doing things once we get the value of it, but we have to start valuing our health and how we feel versus if we were being good and bad and following a diet or the doctor's rules or even, anti-diet groups have their own rules. And we have to start to say, wait, what guideposts and guidelines are right for me? And this is not as easy as a shift as most people make it seem. It takes time and results, right? We have to see that there's value, and we need a framework to learn what our body really needs, mind, body, and soul. And so I really think that functional medicine can ignite this, whoa, I've been just taking this authority and trusting that this was how my body was, broken, whatnot, and start to say, wait a second, maybe there's a different way to look at this. And if you're really interested in how we can develop further as adults, I really recommend listening to my podcast interview with Heather Thorkelson, Why Change is Hard. And it was a rebroadcast from season 5 and 6. And if there's interest, I can do more episodes here about the change process, because I do believe that's a wellness tool that we'll get into more. So as all of this is happening, right, of me realizing that I reversed most of my IBS, my depression, at the time I thought I was feeling 100% better. I would later learn I only got to 0, which was functional medicine I'll talk about in a second. But it was a huge catalyst as it started my identity shift. I've always been suspect of authority. I've always had these rebel seeds in me, never really felt quote unquote normal, but I was really not fully in that role. I was still in disbelief about how many more people didn't know about this. I wanted to share it with everyone because it relieved so much pain for me. But then when I really started to study in grad school and especially after the November election, these cultural narratives around willpower or discipline, that's what we need for our bodies and stuff, it really comes from this nesting doll of capitalism, racism, and patriarchy. And so we are swimming in polluted water. So it's not as easy to start to think that we have more power than we do, because we have been disenfranchised, we have been victimized. It doesn't mean we need to stay in the victim role, but we have very real scars from living in the culture we do. So this was a huge catalyst, and you would think that it sounds really exciting, and it was on some end, but it was also a really dark night of the soul for me. People talk a lot about mindset shifts, and there's many ways to define mindset, but in Truce with Food, the mind shift is so radical because it's a completely new identity shift from a good patient and a good girl to a coactive creator of our health and lives. And so what I started to realize was no one was in charge at the wheel of our healthcare system. And it opened me up to these books like Food Politics by Dr. Marion Nestle, or The Secret History of the War on Cancer by Dr. Deborah Davis. And I started to really see a really gross and dark underbelly of how our medical system had been set up. It's not to say that there aren't great people doing great work in that system. It's just that there's inherent flaws, like there are in all systems. But to me, I don't think you mess around with people's health. I think I've said this on the podcast before. All right, if you want to try to make me feel like I'm a different person because I'm in a BMW or a Jeep, all right, whatever. That doesn't feel life or death. But when you're actively suppressing information and you're bribing the American Medical Association to say tobacco isn't harmful, I don't know, that just feels like that crosses a certain kind of sales line that I think is unethical. But I kind of gone off on a tangent. But this was kind of some of the stuff that we have to weed out and see as we start to really understand why the authorities in our lives, it's not that they need to be perfect, but they have flaws and blind spots too. And there's something terrifying about that, but also liberating, because then we realize as individuals, we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to have all the answers. We just have to start learning. So I was talking to a private client the other day, and she was saying how it's been so great in our work together because it's helped her find there are so many people out there that are saying like, this is bullshit, right? The weakness, the willpower, the discipline narratives. But we aren't the majority, and we are the rebels out here on our own. So it takes time to get out of the surround sound of these myths and of these experts and authorities. And really, we have to come to a developmental place where we realize no one is perfect. No one has all the answers. We are all complicated individuals. And that can mean we can start and continue on our own path. We don't need to wait and avoid or have all the answers. So functional medicine was a bridge to me stepping further out into co-creating my healing. And I will always be grateful for that. And starting to get to the mindset of things as symptoms, not as problems, also made me start to wonder if inconsistency was a symptom, not a character defect from lack of willpower or discipline. Now, this is the part that where I think the limitations of functional medicine turn into cons. First, since the early days, the term functional has been co-opted in a way. Everything I see now is functional. I see functional nutritionist, I see functional training, I see functional foods, and everyone's using a different definition, right? And just like coaching, which I talked about with Courtney Townley on episode 2 of our season, there is a wide variety of training now for functional medicine practitioners. And some people are functional medicine doctors in the sense that they were doctors beforehand and then have gone through enough training. And, some people are nurse practitioners who have tons of medical information, and they've gone to functional medicine training. And then there's people like me who I have a health coaching background, right? I was mentored in functional medicine. I've taken courses in it, and I don't even call myself a functional medicine practitioner because I haven't kept up with it because I've now left functional medicine behind, which I'm going to share. I still keep some of the tenets, but my point is that like, I don't have as much knowledge, right, as someone who's taken all the courses, right? And there's new developments all the time, right? So there's just a wide variety of education in where people are starting when they enter the functional medicine curriculum, and then how they keep up with it. So there's various education levels, and that can be really overwhelming. It's also really expensive now. Now, what's interesting, and again, everything requires context. Some people's insurance covers it. Like my sister lives out in San Francisco, and her insurance covers certain functional medicine practitioners or people who have trained in functional medicine. Whereas I'm out here in Pittsburgh, and our insurance, I mean, granted, I haven't looked super hard, but I don't know any functional medicine people who take insurance out here, which means everything's out of pocket. I even had to pay out of pocket for vitamin D testing when my insurance was in Philly, even though my doctor wrote a note to the insurance company saying, Ali has a history of cancer. We know low vitamin D levels. This is imperative for her health. They were like, sorry, don't have active cancer. Not going to cover it. And that was the time I was in grad school and just starting my business. And that $150 to test my vitamin D was painful, And so a functional medicine, seeing the practitioners out of pocket and then all the testing that goes along with that can be really, really expensive. And I have clients who feel very overwhelmed by either the price or all the results that come back. And it puts them into avoider mode, right? Or the other extreme of nothing, of all, and thinking they need to do all these restrictive cleanses or something like the Candida diet. And this is the limitation that most functional providers don't understand: holistic behavioral change. In other words, how do we support people in a way that meets them where they are, not a one-size-fits-all protocol based on their lab work, and honors that, at least with my clients, they are trying to get healthy at the same time they're raising kids, have a high-pressured career. In other words, they've got a lot of real life going on, right? And many of my clients are struggling with consistency of eating whole foods, right? And all the supplements and powders of functional medicine aren't going to work if we aren't doing the foundational nutrition work. And that includes even when you're traveling, even over the holidays, right? Granted, we're not going to eat as well over the holidays or whatever, but we still need to not be binging during those times, especially because for a lot of my clients, there's a lot of inconsistent in their schedule, from traveling, from the cycles of work, from kids getting sick, from curveballs being thrown, right? So there's big transitional times of our lives, like new jobs or new relationships. And it's not a weakness if you can't do it. And so I think functional medicine can often add more pressure when we don't understand the emotional patterns that are protecting people when they eat out of alignment of their protocol. If you're a regular Insatiable listener, you know that we look at self-sabotage, not as self-sabotage, but self-protection. And I really think back to myself 15 years ago, right? And I didn't have the money or see the value for that stuff. So I just did an elimination diet of only gluten and dairy, and only one at a time. I tried things here and there. Now, granted, I'm very slow to change, which is why I've become an expert in change, right? We teach what we need to learn. At its best, I'm discerning and wise, and at its worst, I'm very highly skeptical and frugal, which makes me slow to change. And as I talked about with Courtney, right? Like I'm faster at getting the support and paying for support, but it's something that still takes me longer than probably most people. So take my viewpoint from consider the lens I'm coming from. But my point in sharing all that is I was still able to get the transformational results without going to extremes and all the testing because of my real life experience that allowed me to change a lot of how I was eating and the effort. And no matter what you have, cooking more and eating more whole foods will support any root cause issues you have, from IBS to depression to candida, right? So functional medicine got me to start cooking so much at home, and it gave me targeted supplements to get my gut back on track. But I no longer need those supplements in the long run, right? If a supplement is doing its job, it's a healing protocol, so it should get you back to better eventually and not need them in the long run. But that didn't come from a test result, but my own experience of feeling better and my symptoms decreasing. Now, I also want to put an asterisk here because it also depends how much pain you're in. I was in so much pain, physical and emotional, but I had really normalized the emotional pain. And I was so high functional. So my motivation is different than someone like Dr. Terry Walls, who we've had on this podcast and also had a miraculous recovery, right, from MS. But with how great I feel today, I seriously think the me of 15 years ago was resilient in ways I am not today. I was battling food all the time. I didn't love my job. I was in so much physical pain. The me of today would never put up with all of that discomfort, but I had normalized it, right? So I'd been struggling with PTSD from cancer for 12 years at this point. Battling food was normal, and mostly everyone else was doing it. And I had accepted cravings and crashes as normal because, again, it was happening to everyone else around me. I didn't feel as lost as I was, but I was off track in a metaphorical way for sure. Now, for other people like Dr. Walls, they can have dramatic turnarounds, and it can seem much more like a straight shot. But all turnarounds will take time, right? Even if people like Dr. Terry Walls started to, change things right away, it took her a lot to get to that point, and it still took time, even if she was doing everything properly or on protocol. And clients ask how people can do these dramatic turnarounds. They're like, well, I talked to someone and they had, Hashimoto's, and then they were able to just change everything overnight. And I tell them it's all based on how much pain you're aware that you are in. So many of us have normalized a low emotional fulfillment and tons of stress and overwhelm like I had. So we aren't aware of how much we were putting up with until we really own our story and get out from under that. Versus if you are in so much physical pain from something like MS, or you have onset dementia and your functional medicine practitioner thinks it's from type 3 diabetes, right? There's different root causes of Alzheimer's. You have a lot more incentive, right, to get with the program. And so, we have to think about how much pain we know that we are in, and the more that we're in, the more incentive there is to change dramatically. And some people are in so much debilitating pain that they can't function. And so their healing and doing something dramatic from a food standpoint can work. So functional medicine is great often at first people who are introduced to the power of nutrition from a medical lens. This was the case for me. I had only viewed food calorically. It's kind of the same way people on Biggest Loser often lose weight on the show because there's an education gap, right? They don't know to look for sugars. They don't know what a portion size is. And many people aren't aware of the medical power of nutrition. Half my friends from high school are this way. They don't really know what I do, right? And that's okay. Like functional medicine is still pretty radical, I think. At least it hasn't hit the suburbs out here in Pittsburgh yet. But again, this is also, I think something can only be as innovative as that it's looking at the cultural myths that have formed it. And so functional medicine looks at biology holistically, but it doesn't look at the whole emotional or soul body of the person or how that interacts with our physiology or physical pain. So you get recommendations, for example, that acknowledge stress from a functional medicine practitioner, but they aren't really getting to the deep roots of our stress, which are our stories, patterns, and behaviors that need to be released and changed. And this is also the real life obstacle many people find with implementing all the functional medicine protocols. So for example, you'll get meditation recommendations or walks in nature from functional medicine practitioners. This is great. I love that people are recommending this, but those are reactions to stress, not preventing them. In my work, we want to understand why you need so much stress management, right? What's happening? And that's what we get to the root of in Truce with Food, and we start to really understand, and why am I eating this now? Because our stories don't just cause us to battle food, they also cause us to be chronically stressed, overwhelmed, and miss out on meaningful experiences. Healing isn't about only stressing less, it's also about living more, right? And so I feel like functional medicine has made the turn physically, but not quite emotionally yet. And some people might think, well, hey, the change process isn't the realm of medicine, right? And that's because our education system is siloed. And therefore, we aren't looking at how the change process itself is a radical healing tool. And a system is only, I said this before, but I want to repeat it, it's only as innovative as it's willing to question the cultural myths that shape it. And I think functional medicine has stepped out of the battle or war metaphor that Western medicine operates under, yet it's still operating under the separation myth from nature, including the quantum nature of nature, and thus our biology to a large degree. And I know functional medicine honors the environment, and they talk about environment and lifestyle turning on epigenetics, but I don't think it's gone far enough. When changing how we change in my approach, using a developmental approach rather than a traditional coaching approach, when we're becoming the author of our story, it has this ripple or quantum effect of radical healing. And that's because we're getting to the root cause resolution of change. It's not positive psychology or motivational interviewing, which a lot of functional medicine practitioners are getting into. That approach can move the needle, but you can only go as far as that your story is holding you back. It's kind of like a rubber band gun from middle school, right? It's like, okay, we've got we're pointing forward and we're stretched and we're moving forward, but you can only stretch that rubber band as far as your thumb is pulling back. Or often on this podcast, we talk about it. You've got your gas, positive psychology and motivational interviewing are your gas, but your story is your brake, and you're going to flood your engine eventually. So, for example, when you change your story and work on the physical pieces, I have clients who they're binging when they come to me. That's the pain point. Or and they've also never gotten, I'm going to give you one client example, or she never had gotten her period. She was also getting muscle cramps at night. And, she tried magnesium, tried all the tricks of trade to the muscle cramps, just thought she was going to have to live with not getting her period. And the main pain point was binging, which is why she came to me. And so she had her truce with food. And so she stopped binging. And because we also cleared up some of the residue trauma from her childhood, her muscle cramps at night were actually psychosomatic symptoms. She got into rather than being in a chronic low-grade fight or flight response, she started getting more into rest and repair. She was able to eat well. She got her period back and her skin cleared up. And so that's radical healing, right? She focused on the root cause, her story. Then I taught her about how to evaluate food for her based on GI and blood sugar. And oh my God, right? Healing and health have become so much fun and rebellious, right? All of these effects have happened. And that's quantum or exponential healing. And that's how nature works. And that further propelled her into her adult development, ability to self-author her life. And there were tons of ripple of changes in her career as a result. So the irony, though, is quantum healing or exponential healing, or you can think of it as cumulative. It's slow and subtle, but after you turn the ship around, which can take about a full year, but because of the sustainability, the results continue to be cumulative, and you start taking bigger and more fulfilling risks, which makes life more and more meaningful. And then you have more internal intrinsic incentive to keep your health routine up, right? Health isn't just about being healthy. It's about, being so healthy and energized and optimistic that you're creating a life you want to be healthy for. So if you think back to your own life, it's when life was blah or out of alignment or just, or you felt really stuck or stressed or pigeonholed, that tends to be the downward spiral. And I also want to emphasize, I always talk about you get encouraged to take more and more risks the more you own your story and focus on this emotional healing. But risks aren't always about bigger, more, faster. It's often about self-actualization and trusting what truly lights you up versus what we think we should or have to do. You literally expand your definition of what it takes to heal and health as you push your own frontiers, as you become more resilient. So I always think of kind of the metaphor of like, we're running through doors for more and more freedom, right? More and more fulfillment. The first one is nutrition, and then the bigger one is emotional. And we keep opening up more and more room, more freedom and fulfillment, the more we develop as adults and self-author our story. Now, there can be trap doors, right? Which my clients have realized that they'll be going along, and then they start to, it can be a couple of years, and they start to just, they're not binging or overeating like they used to, but the nighttime eating comes back. And what they know to realize is another angle of their story has come up, and it's time to step outside their comfort zone even more. And if you want more insight on this, check out season 6, episode 6 for more of when our bodies become our projects when we're not creatively challenged. And creative can mean, intellectually challenged as well. And the reason that I bring this up is because, and you've heard me probably, if you're a regular listener, quote Octavia Butler, who I learned about from the Fabulous Women at How to Survive the End of the World podcast. And Octavia Butler has this quote that God is change. And I love that because it makes you realize that change is a healing tool. You get awakened to the divine within you. And what could be more powerful than that? And we can also think of this from a Chinese medicine lens. We're clearing out stagnation in places, right? And this is when I hit a wall about a year after gradually getting better with functional medicine. I felt better. I was amazed. I was telling everyone about how awesome this was. People thought I was crazy though, because this was 15 years ago. But then I couldn't stay in it. I started binging on sugar because I felt restricted by being gluten-free. There were literally like no options of being gluten-free back then except like rice cakes. And so I was binging on peanut M&Ms and York peppermint patties. And then I would go back to gluten at times when I was tired and it was just tons of uncertainty. But it was much less than before, but I had enough nights where all my IBS symptoms were coming back. And I still didn't fully understand self-sabotage as self-protection at all. So then I started to beat myself up. Now I know how amazing I could feel. And it's helped me start to wean off my medication. And now I have this pressure. I don't want to go back on medication. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Am I so weak and uncommitted that I can't control my eating, even though knowing how great I felt? And again, diet culture had taught me that my inconsistency in nutritional choices was about lack of willpower and discipline, and that this mindset was still with me a little bit. And this is exactly what my clients believe whenever they fall off track or can't stick to their functional medicine healing protocol. And it's a pervasive but limiting vantage point. They've gone to other health coaches that work with functional medicine practitioners and doctors or ones themselves. And the functional medicine world tends to give people advice like, don't go to the party hungry, bring your own food, ask yourself if it's worth it. And that can be helpful. But this is also when you're not getting to the root of the emotional work, which isn't about food. So over time, what I learned about my own healing journey and what I've seen with hundreds of clients over 12 years is that you can only go so far with changing your diet. And what I realized is that truth tells us endings are beginnings. Just like my depression wasn't a serotonin deficiency, my falling off track wasn't a discipline issue. It was an invitation to find out more. So now I'm not going to take you through every shift and change, but basically after 4.5 years in graduate school and working with probably about 100 clients, I've come to the conclusion that emotional healing is equal to nutritional changes. And when you focus on the emotional work, we can so much more easily discern what works for us from a food perspective. And the emotional work I'm talking about requires an identity shift. It's more subtle and takes time, but it's life learning. It's life changing. And it's just not enough to stress less or be consistent with our food choices. We need to live more for that consistency. In other words, we need to own our story. And in doing that, we create deep meaning in our lives that create possibilities and deep relationships that create a life we want to be healthy for. And that's when I left functional medicine behind. I'm a maximizer. This is a personality type. It's not necessarily a good one. You can often feel loss. But what this means is I'm someone who wants maximum results from their choices. And I want that for my clients. And for me, I saw from my own experience and my clients that supporting people to own their story simplified all the health to-dos people think they need, because many wellness tools are only band-aids for these root cause of stories, patterns, and behaviors. So I wanted to develop a clear process for owning our story because of the results and simplicity it creates. Complex process to simplify, right? My client above, right? She was trying magnesium, Epsom salt baths, all this stuff for sleep, and didn't get her period, all these issues. But when we got to the root, a lot of things cleared up and she didn't need half the stuff she needed at the time. Another client example, a functional medicine doctor put her on all these powders and supplements for GI issues. And we were mainly working on how she was struggling to digest life, right? There's an emotional metaphor when we have IBS, depression, all this stuff that's gut related or autoimmune. Why are we attacking ourselves emotionally? So once we worked on her story, and again, this took 6 months and my goal was never even to give input on what she was doing with all her powders and supplements, but she no longer needed the powder and supplements. And she was like, you know what? These don't even taste that good. And I was like, yeah, because as she healed, she realized that health should be more and more pleasurable. Her skin also cleared up, and then she started switching over to non-toxic skin products, but only needed one skin product because she wasn't over oily anymore. And her consistency of eating well became easy from owning her story, and enabled her to better naturally detox, because then she decided to go off the birth control pill, which sometimes you have to detox if you're not eating well consistently. And so her body, because she was so healthy, it did all that stuff naturally. And so she didn't need a lot of these bells and whistles that functional medicine practitioners will often give to people. And my fear is that sometimes we're recreating the big pharma model, but from a functional medicine perspective, and saying it's natural when the underlying philosophy is still not getting to the root. So her story resolution saved a ton of money and simplified her to-dos. And I want to point out that the best tools will make themselves obsolete. So this doesn't mean functional medicine isn't adequate. It's just that it really did its job. Kind of like the best example I can give is chicken pox. The more we're finding out about these viruses, we're realizing that they do, when we actually go through having these viruses, and they actually decrease certain types of diseases. So for example, a big study came out of Baylor University that children who have had chicken pox have a 20% less chance of a certain type of brain tumor. And so by having chicken pox, it left those children with some sort of immunity, right? There was some sort of resiliency. And so functional medicine left me with a stronger body and mindset, but I no longer needed it because it did its job. Same with, a simpler example is probiotics, right? Probiotics are super concentrated. I needed those at the time because my gut was so compromised. A lot of my clients need them. But if your gut's healing, you should be able to get them from food and shouldn't need the high concentration. Clients after Truce with Food, they stop needing therapists, they stop needing expensive superfoods, right? And I created the Insatiable community because it takes a while to master owning our story and skills. It's a much more subtle process. But then people start wanting to take bigger risks now that their story is not holding them back. And then those risks become meaningful, they become fulfilling, and that becomes healing, right? And so you get this wonderful quantum effect. So I still integrate the blood sugar and hormonal, blood sugar is responsible for hormonal issues and gut healing principles into my work with clients. But I found that when we are living more and not just stressing less by releasing our own story, we shift the body more into rest and repair than fight or flight, and many issues clear up on our own without a hyper focus on supplements. I've been amazed at how many clients have been able to resolve symptoms that are really psychosomatic. And I'm a big skeptic. Again, that's part of it can be strength or a weakness depending on the day. Psychosomatic symptoms, but the lack of data makes me like, is that really a thing? And I can tell you it is. And I conclude this because food and lifestyle shifts, like sleeping, doing all the stuff for periods that a functional medicine person might say, when we really get to the root of these emotional patterns, a lot of stuff starts working. And I can give you an example with depression, which a lot of my clients struggle with, is that, I thought I had gotten so much better because I was better than I was before. But what I would really have to do to end up really working through my depression, to get away from zero and to get much further up was I had to own my story. I had to blow up my life. I was really off track. Not all my clients have to blow up my life. And by blowing up my life, it was much more subtle. But I had to start doing things that brought more of myself back to how I was making decisions. And same with my clients. Again, I don't focus on taking people off medication. I don't focus on that kind of stuff. But a lot of my clients after our work together don't need their medication anymore because they've healed their gut, balanced their blood sugar, and they've gotten the parts back of themselves that had gone away to protect themselves at a time. And so they have more of a wholeness to them. And so they needed emotional and physical support to really get through the depression. And so I really want to emphasize that health is not an end destination. It's a vehicle to pursuing the possibility you are meant for. And you can be healthy, fully alive, even if you still have arthritis or certain conditions. I don't want you to think that story ownership is a magic bullet. Rather, it enables us to feel more fully alive, which includes feeling all our emotions, not just the quote, positive ones. I don't even believe there's certain positive emotions. Like that's a value judgment that, hey, I love feeling happy and content and well rested and all that stuff more than sad and challenging, but we need all of them and they all serve different functions. And what I now understand about quantum biology and healing, and if you haven't listened to season 6, episode 5 with Brandon, where it's called Light Mitochondria Dysfunction and Weight Gain, we talk about quantum biology. And so nature is exponential. So if we aren't getting exponential results, I don't think we're really getting to the root of issues. And I'll share with you my own increasing awareness around exponential issues in a minute. And again, I said this up above, but I've learned that people, when they contact me about the podcast, tend to hear certain things sometimes. So exponential results take time. It is not instant. Like, oh my God, I'm instantly going to drop 20 pounds or I'm instantly not going to be depressed. No, it requires a strong nutritional and emotional foundation. And that can take 6 months at least to rebuild your foundation or fill in the cracks. Okay. So that over time though, leads to exponential results because of the consistency and the accumulation. If you think about, right, money, right? Like I always say like, oh, if you start with a lot, right, then you can like basically sit on the interest, right? Like, oh, if you win the lottery, you win $20 million, right? Like take the whole lump sum at once, get 10 million, and then let 9 million sit on the bank and you'll be able to just accumulate interest, right? And that's what we need to do with our health from an emotional and nutritional foundation is get that initial chunk really strong. And then the choices we make and the way that we take in life becomes more resilient, more growth mindset. And then we keep making more and more choices that feel exciting and align for us. And so then we spiral up and that's quantum. So yeah. And also I want to bring up the importance of this emotional and exponential healing is because often clients from a functional medicine practitioner will be told they need to go on a Candida diet. And what happens is the emotional house isn't in order. And so there feels like there's no structure in like, oh, I'm not in the job I want, or I'm not dating or whatever. And so then we hyper-focus structure on, oh, the Candida diet or this functional medicine protocol. But then after 2 weeks, we feel deprived. The novelty has worn off, right? We're not getting that. We're not making emotional choices that inspire possibility. We do it first. Oh, what's going to happen with this Candida diet or this gut? But then after 2 weeks, we hit a wall, or if we can even make it that far. And it's like, oh, I'm only feeling so much better. Yeah, I feel better, right? That's like kind of getting to zero, but I don't feel so much better, or the novelty is worn off. I need to create possibility or novelty somewhere else in my life. And I don't know how to do that because it all feels so overwhelming. And that's why the emotional piece is really important. Now, where I sit today doing foundational things that everyone needs to do if every functional medicine protocol is to work. I'm doing the right foods for my body. That's for me, that's staying gluten-free, but I can do nightshades like eggplants and tomatoes, which used to cause reflux for me. I work on my lighting game. And what I love about light is it's free. Again, check out Brandon's episode of season 6, episode 5. I get pretty good sleep, which I'm going to share in a moment, which is also why I've left functional medicine behind. I have a deeply meaningful and fulfilling career and relationships. And now I'm working on fun and joy. I know that sounds really privileged and maybe even annoying, but when you're someone who is recovering from trauma, you can be very suspect of ease and fun and joy. And that pattern was with me for so long. And I'm grateful that I started to heal that pattern 10 years ago when I did, but it was still with me for so long that it's making a bigger learning curve for me. So now I want to share a more personal story about where my health has been the last 2.5 years and how it further shifted the way I see functional medicine, because I think it'll help a lot of people out there. So after the 2016 election, I developed insomnia. And I thought it was about the election. It was very triggering for me. Speaking of PTSD, it's something that you definitely work through and it gets better and better, but uncertainty is a huge trigger for me. And when that election happened, I couldn't articulate it at the time, but it was crumbling my entire worldview, but the country I thought I lived in. And it would eventually crumble a big mindset that I was looking at life through, which in America, we are groomed to believe in meritocracy, which is if you work hard, you will succeed, right? And it's all on the individual's merit. And I had believed that. I mean, I knew that, I grew up in a very progressive household. I knew that not everyone started out at the same foot. I knew that there was gender inequality, racial inequality, class inequality, but I didn't realize the degree that it existed. And so if you want to hear more about how my worldview of meritocracy collapsed and how that influences how we view health, because our healthcare system views life often through meritocracy, which is why we think thin people try harder, heavy people are undisciplined. All of that is because of the lens that we look at our cultural myths. So that's episode 5, Your Green Juice Doesn't Make You Worthy, if you're interested in that. But to come back to my health, it had triggered major uncertainty with me. And I manage uncertainty pretty well these days. I mean, that's why I always say entrepreneurship has healed me as much as chemo did to cure me. I've been through so much uncertainty on this road less travel of health and the way that I coach and, having to support myself financially. And I'm even great around my own scans for cancer, which I call scanxiety. But something like this election is completely out of my control, right? I mean, you're depending on the totality of everyone in the country. So a different angle of my story around uncertainty acted up, and I don't overeat anymore. And so I was full on feeling the depth of uncertainty. And I don't have any vices, actually. I don't like to shop. I never really drank because I was always saving my calories for food. Work used to be my vice, and now I'm working on that. So the election made me more aware of my own belief blind spots, but it took a while to see that. And I was really naive because I already felt so counterculture to America because of the neighborhood I grew up in. We were one of the only families that didn't go to church. My mom was only one of the only moms that worked at the time. I'm not Christian, which the default in America is Christianity guides a lot of our holidays, our calendar, like everything. And I've always struggled with my weight. Well, not anymore, but I had as a kid. Cancer, all these things had made me feel really different, and that I was kind of outside the norm of what I didn't like about America. There's many things I love about it, but there was the idea of America. But I had clearly internalized layers of misogyny, racism, and capitalism that I didn't even know I was living by. So I had a lot of sleep issues. And then I tried intermittent fasting. I'm all about experimenting. I only tried it for 2 weeks because basically I'm lazy, and Carlos was eating breakfast, and I was like, okay, I don't want to take time to eat breakfast either. So I tried it, but it set something off with my periods. I was getting hot flashes and my periods stopped coming. And so I had sleep issues, blood sugar issues. I know period issues are blood sugar issues. So I started seeing a naturopath in late 2017. I had lived in Pittsburgh then. Frankly, I didn't really know any functional medicine practitioners, but I also felt like I know enough from functional medicine that I can take care of it myself. And I also had a low thyroid. It's always kind of gone back and forth, but it was starting to creep up again. And so I knew that with Carlos and I wanting to start a family and this influencing my fertility, that natural things take longer. So I got on it in 2017. And my naturopath works with bioenergetic medicine. When I started it was a total leap of faith. Other people had said that she had helped them, which is why, I trusted her, did my due diligence. But you hold these copper rods and she basically they do this in Germany and other countries, but it's like, again, I'm still a Western person. Not that Germany isn't Western, but I can't comprehend how this actually works. But she basically diagnosed that I have a very sluggish lymph system and had heavy metals, which she thinks are from my vaccines, and I have a few mercury fillings left. And so we started working, and I said, well, you know what? I said, I had Hodgkin's disease, which is a sluggish lymph system. And so that's just how my body is. And she's like, well, I think your lymph was sluggish and you couldn't detox from the pesticide exposure that probably eventually caused your cancer because of the mercury in the vaccines that you had. And I was like, I don't know. But I took a leap of faith and was doing a lot of the homeopathic stuff that she recommended. And I was like, okay, we'll see what happens. And then my best friend, who's a little older than me, was having some fertility issues. And she told me, Ali, I know you don't really love Western medicine, but go get your numbers checked because you want to know the data. And she's right. And so I went to the Western medicine facility here in March of 2018. I guess that was a year ago. And they basically diagnosed me with early menopause on the basis of my insomnia and some of the symptoms I was describing. And they said, it's probably from the chemo, nothing we can really do for you. And that was, interesting. I mean, I definitely cried, had some had a lot of sifting to do. But I decided, you know what? I'm going to try this natural stuff. So I added acupuncture and herbs, got a lot more sunlight over the summer. And since then, my thyroid is at the lowest it's ever been at 2.0. My periods are back to being regular. My sleep is 80% better, maybe even 90%. Now, I want to hold that, you can go in and out of menopause when it's perimenopause. It's not a one-time event. We're all on a spectrum. Some people start as early as 30s. Most people on average, it hits the 50s. So, I could be out of that phase and I'm holding that reality. But in talking with my naturopath, and the more I learn about how sexism in whiteness is baked into our culture, I started to realize that functional medicine is often doing what naturopaths, which women in indigenous cultures who have been relying on nature, have been doing for quite a while. And so functional medicine and the approach is much more masculine approach. It's linear. It's not looking at integrating our emotional patterns, and it's not always root cause resolution. Granted, I haven't done the whole shebang with a functional medicine practitioner where I get all the labs and I do all that kind of stuff. But my ND is using energy medicine and homeopathy, which is a very different system than functional medicine that has gotten me quite profound results. And so that has really shifted how I view even root cause resolution. And when I look at Truce with Food, I started to realize that framework for clients is homeopathic when it comes to emotional stuff. We gradually introduce uncomfortable feelings that make people feel overwhelmed or stressed or think in black and white or all or nothing. And we learn to discern what those feelings mean, what they meant in the past. And part of owning our story is, what do we want these feelings to mean today? And in homeopathy, the dose determines the poison, right? So homeopathy is where you use not an extreme, but a gradual, I'm blanking out. I'll come back. I have it in my notes, but homeopathy really is. But homeopathy is a very different philosophy than even functional medicine operates under. It's practiced in Germany and other parts of the world. For those of you in hospital, it used to be a completely homeopathic hospital, but it was eventually outlawed. And if you want to know more about that, in the show notes, there's an article that shows the capitalistic roots of why natural medicine that women in indigenous cultures did versus standardized Western medicine, that kind of dance about the Flexner report. And I've mentioned it on previous episodes here, but if you want a great article, it's in the show notes of this episode. And also, side note, we always do transcripts as well. So if you ever want a transcript, it's there. So I realized that I wouldn't be as open to naturopathic medicine and this energy medicine if it wasn't for the complete identity shift that functional medicine began from from helping me to co-create my life, right? Because this energy medicine and her telling me that I still have heavy metal stuff, that my lymph, which I thought was how my body was, could actually be just another symptom I never realized because I don't sweat a lot. I get inflamed very easily. Like if I eat dairy, I still do it and take the hit, but my face gets really puffy. Her telling me that could be even reversed. And then her telling me, you have traces of Lyme. I don't have Lyme disease, but she says most people in Western Pennsylvania have microbes. And now that we've gotten rid of those, my thyroid is at a level that it's never been at. And I had told myself, because of the radiation, my mom's on Synthroid, my grandma was, all these things. It's just to show you there's layers and layers. And that's what I'm really interested in right now. So functional medicine was an important bridge for my Western mind at the time, but I'm much better at evaluating things outside my own comfort zone now, thanks to my own Truce with Food transformation, what made me actually take the time and money to pay out of pocket for my naturopath. And she takes a half hour to get to, and then it's an hour appointment, right? There's a commitment of resources there that I don't know if I would have done had I not bridged from functional medicine. So now these days, I am much more into herbal medicine, homeopathic. Now, as I realize nutrition, movement, and owning our stories is about reconnecting us to our hunger for alignment with nature. Nature, right? Food is nature, sunlight is nature, but also our own true natures. I'm also at a tweaking place with my health, and many people think tweaks mean small changes, but once you have the foundational pieces of nutrition, emotional safety, belonging, and meaning in place, subtle is quite profound and exponential. So I have a much more integrative belief system now. And I know what I have a much also different definition of integrated than I think even functional medicine practitioners do, and definitely our medical system. Like I shared on this podcast before, I once met a doctor who thought he was integrated because he shared a billing system with someone, right? We all use integration differently. I've also seen in my own peer group, functional medicine can be an entry point for many practitioners, but often if they stay long enough in what's possible for total radical healing, especially the women, they leave it behind for a more holistic approach that integrates the more yin or feminine archetype qualities like nature, pleasure, emotions, and cycles. And so if you listen to episode 55, I define the masculine and feminine and their patterns and how they affect our health. And it isn't really male and female qualities. We tend to think of that way because how we've been socially conditioned to think of what is male or female, but rather these patterns. And I did my master's thesis on it. So it's a pretty good episode. I'd recommend it if you're interested in more of this, in what true integration is. And that's episode 55. So in summary, functional medicine can be a huge developmental experience for those of us who benefit from it and need to shift into a nutrition as medicine mindset. And that is all some people need. Our growth comes where we struggle. And for some people, especially people who haven't had food issues in the past, they can transform their relationship to food much more easily than those of us who have struggled. We all grow from various mediums, right? For many of us, it's our relationship to food. So kind of a tangent, but the point being is it's important to be clear about what functional medicine can and cannot do. It's not a magic bullet, it's a tool, and it's not the final solution or destination. And what I've seen with people is even sometimes functional medicine, their protocols for work will work for a year or two, and then they start to feel like they can't keep them up, and they think that that's a failure on their part. And what I want to say is that's the same way for me, it was an invitation to look at what that inconsistency is. It can mean you're ready for a different tool. It doesn't mean that it didn't work. It meant it was great. It got you to that point. And now you're ready to, hop onto another lily pad. But, even if you do functional medicine, you still have to do the work of cooking more, using more whole foods, getting better at sleep, sunlight, movement that works for your body. And again, it can be really expensive. And if it's behavioral change, you really need to do the basics, which are highly complicated because of how our society is just structured. So I don't want to discount how powerfully motivating it also can be to have a healthcare provider witness you, acknowledge the pain you're in with you on your issues. Functional medicine at its best does that. But if your bigger pain point is consistency, you don't feel you've gotten all the results you can from all your shakes and powders and pills, working on the emotional work first can simplify and clear up enough symptoms that you don't necessarily need functional medicine. And when people come to me asking, should I do a gut cleanse or work with you or whatnot, I always ask them, what feels the most inspiring to change first? Does going on a gut cleanse feel like, ugh? Or does it feel like, I really want to explore this? Or does looking at the emotional stuff feel, I got to take care of that because I want to do a gut cleanse, but I can't even muster the energy, right? What we often say is lack of willpower or discipline or thinking we're weak is actually, when you know how to decode it, pointing you to your next best step. And because healing isn't linear, you're going to have to circle around to all of it. And so it's all about what feels curious and expansive for you to explore. Now I want to leave you with 3 questions to ask yourself if functional medicine can serve you right now. First, am I eating mostly whole foods and still struggling? If so, functional medicine can be really helpful. It can help with those tweaks, right? Do I need some enzymes here? Do I have SIBO here, right? Question number 2, do I have the ability to prioritize only my health right now? Because usually if you're working with a functional medicine practitioner, this is going to have to be your full focus. Doesn't mean you have to quit your job or, not be a parent anymore, but it's going to have to occupy most of your free time because it's a learning curve. And lastly, do I feel really inspired to change my food right now? Yes, if you do, this feels a great next step. If you can't do another diet or protocol, emotional work is probably a better first step. And functional medicine, I don't feel like even their stress management techniques or meditation or any of that stuff really gets to the root. It feels like a reaction to stress rather than preventing it. So look for what will give you the results and momentum for your next step. Healing isn't linear. And so, like I said just a minute ago, we need to do it all. Okay. Not all at the same time, but it's important to listen to yourself and feels like what feels curious and I want to explore rather than I have to do this protocol and it's my only choice. There's many choices. So I hope this was helpful for you guys to get a nuanced understanding of functional medicine. It can be wildly helpful. And if it's not the right tool at the right time, it can be wildly frustrating. So I hope this episode has helped you make the choice for when it is helpful for you or if you even need it. So yeah, thanks for being here. Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.